Welcome back to another DF Direct. I'm John Lindeman, and we are here to talk about some interesting things that we've been covering this week, as well as a special new product that's coming out in the next couple months or so. And to do that, I am joined finally, at last, by Tom Morgan. Tom, how's it going?
Very good, thanks. How's it going, John? It's a debut with you. It's the first time we've been one-to-one over the internet.
Exactly. It's good that we finally got a chance to do this because you're finally covering something that's closer to my heart, which is some retro action. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Capcom Home Arcade stick, which they brought over to your office, I believe, and you had a chance to kind of spend the day just playing with it and capturing it and all that good stuff. So that's really cool. But first, let's talk about what's going on in the world of DF. What's new with you, Tom, since we last spoke?
Well, I've been exploring a couple of studios to see what's coming up. Obviously, we've got the Call of Duty in-depth tech feature coming out. We will have some really great glimpses at behind the scenes of how the game's put together. And I'm gonna hopefully get something from Mikhail Drobot about that. But other than that, yeah, I've got something very special to do with a CD Projekt Red project, which will be coming soon. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Otherwise, I had pretty much just this hands-on with the Capcom Home Arcade at the end of last week, and that's kind of dominated my focus over the last few days.
Wow, okay, that sounds pretty good. I mean, I just played through Ion Fury recently. As a recording of this, we put the video up yesterday. Just a brilliant game, like it's a perfect return to form. I was absolutely stunned by it. I mean, you know, I'm a big fan of these old school shooters and that complex level design with exploration focus, and this brings it, and it just looks awesome. And yeah, so if you want to know more about that, do check out the video. And then in addition, kind of getting ready for Gamescom, which hits next week. I will be there in Cologne with Alex Battaglia, so we can talk about some Wolfenstein together and other things. Yeah, there's lots of cool demos coming up, capture stuff, that should be fun. And then I'm also working on a video for Turok 2, which by the time this goes live, hopefully that video will hit the next day. So just kind of a chance to look at the Switch version that just came out and sort of discuss it. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. But, you know, I think for today's topic then, I really want to just jump into it because I'm really curious about how this thing turned out. There's been some controversy around it. There's been some interesting impressions. The design is certainly unique. But what's your first impression, Tom? They brought this thing in, like it looks like the Capcom logo, but it's a giant set of two arcade sticks in this unit. How does it feel? How does it look in person? Like, what are your thoughts?
Basically, the Capcom Home Arcade is actually by Koch Media, who got the license from Capcom. And the idea was that they're going to replicate the idea of what they had with the Commodore 64 Mini by basically making an emulation box kind of just to catch like a retro tribute, basically. And in this case, it's the CPS1 and CPS2 classics in the arcade that they're really focused on. And to do that, they obviously had to take a sidestep away from the concept of a miniaturized console and actually just make a kind of arcade board. So what you've got is an all-in-one slab with player 1, player 2, and they've gone for really high-end parts to justify the price tag, which is £200. So yeah, it's a steep one. The way I saw it is like you can buy arcade sticks about at, you know, £70, £100, and this is a kind of 2-in-1 with the high-end Sanwa parts. There's an octagonal gate joystick on each side. Yeah, so from a hardware perspective, when I first opened it up and unboxed it, they've gone for a very interesting design. I don't think it's to everyone's tastes. It's basically the Capcom logo screaming at you across the top facade. And I'm not, you know, I don't think I can really defend it. If you're not into that, then it's tough luck. There's no other stylings coming out at launch.
It's certainly a strange look that they went for, but it's interesting because there are other products kind of like this that are unlicensed, obviously, that you can kind of pick up in China, I guess. It's these like all-in-one units where they just use like a simple board in there, and it's usually like HDMI out. It's the same exact concept. Obviously, they said, "Hey, let's try to do this with actual Capcom license." But I guess for me, I'm this really kind of comes down to how good the emulation quality is for each game. So you did share some capture with me, and it does look pretty solid from what I can tell, but this is a difficult one because these games typically run with 384 pixels width. So it's not exact, like the square aspect ratio is not 4:3, it's wider than that, but they're designed to be viewed on a 4:3 display in the arcade, which gives it a slightly higher resolution look. So what are they doing here? Like, it seems like a mix of either full screen or 4:3 somewhat.
So yeah, the resolution side is really interesting actually, because obviously the 384 horizontal, and was it 224 vertical? It's actually,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that was the native res on all those games. And the curious thing about that era was obviously that they never relied on square pixels. It was always pushed to arcade CRT monitors. And of course that meant it always was dictated by the 384 width. And it was never, and so when you translate the original native resolutions those games ran at to modern display technology with square pixels, it actually resolves to widescreen quite naturally. A bit above, like if you do a 5 times on each axis, you end up with 1920 by 1120 or something like that, so just above 1080p. So the scaling when you run it in a kind of widescreen like we've got here is really, really clean. It's got a pristine scale, but obviously, as you can see, it's kind of stretched, and like horizontally, there's way more of a stretch, which means circles turn to ovals. And obviously that means, well, you get a 4:3 mode in there as well. So there's 2 options at least, so you can decide which is your preference. For me, the original 4:3 was better, but you know, either way, you've got the bases covered.
That is an interesting thing, though, that I had thought about was with some TVs these days, like on the LG OLEDs, for instance, they have that sort of free scaling option, you know what I mean? Where
yes.
If you change the aspect ratio, you can sort of like use the cursor to rescale the images you like. So I'm kind of wondering if you set it to full screen for the better pixel, where it's like, you know, more evenly scaled, and then use the TV to shrink it down to 4:3, what that would look like. I'll be curious to see how that works, actually.
Yeah, that would help a bit. I imagine they've gone through a similar process, just at an emulator level, and just shrunk it back down to basically forced 4:3.
Cool. So what kind of games did you actually play on there then?
We had Alien vs. Predator, we had Strider, Cyberbots, there was a whole bunch, Gigawing, Pro Gear. There was loads of really great looking games, which I'll admit, having grown up through the 90s playing console games primarily, I didn't really get a chance to see. These were, you know, games that showed Capcom at the peak of their powers with 2D sprites. And it was amazing just to watch this side of 90s gaming culture that I never really got to appreciate at the time. Perhaps I was too young or something like that. So yeah, it was, I mean, games like Pro Gear and Cyberbots, which Cyberbots I don't think has really caught on as much as Capcom's other fighters, but the sprite work in that game is just incredible. It's huge, chunky sprites.
They were really doing awesome work back then. I mean, obviously the true pinnacle is what they did on CPS3, but this stuff right here on CPS1 and 2, especially on CPS2, just remarkable looking. And even the home consoles during that era weren't even fully equipped to handle it. I mean, on Saturn, there was some games where you could use like the 4 meg RAM card, and you'd actually get all the extra frames of animation. But it wasn't until Dreamcast that we started seeing like pretty much mostly perfect conversions from CPS2 to the home. So yeah, I mean, for me, I did actually play some of these games back in the day. We had a huge arcade near our house. And it was awesome. Like, but you know, stuff like Marvel vs. Capcom I played. I do remember an Alien vs. Predator machine in a local cinema. That was cool. And you know, games like that. But some stuff I really never had a chance to play at an actual arcade. So, and I do appreciate they're kind of digging in sort of to pull up some of those other more unique titles that maybe not everybody had a chance to try. So the lineup from that perspective is fairly interesting, I think. And it is a nice mix of platformers, fighting games, and shooters for the most part. And of course, brawlers.
Right, yeah. I mean, there were some games which are there for the sake of being classics. Also, you know, Final Fight, Street Fighter 2, kind of, they were there, but they didn't look as good as some of them, like the latter year CPS2 stuff. But yeah, definitely that variety ties into the way the hardware is designed, because they've gone for an octagonal gate joystick on both sides, which obviously, well, for me anyway, I prefer a square gate. That's just kind of how I roll with Street Fighter 2. Like the hold moves and all that come out better with square gate for me anyway. But the octagonal gate works better for the shooters, and I think it's a fair compromise. But with that said, I did see screws on the underside of the unit, which look fairly easy to work around, and I'm sure if you've got enough, you know, committed enough, you can just go for it yourself for a DIY job and replace it with other Sanwa square gate joysticks. So it's not a deal breaker. You can definitely work around that if that's a problem.
I'll be curious if we end up reviewing it. I think we'll have to open it up and see what's going on in there. I'm actually really curious to know like what sort of hardware they're using, and I don't think you know that yet. They haven't been forthcoming about the actual hardware. I assume it's some sort of system on a chip in there, but can't say for sure until we open it.
What I got from it was it's an ARM processor, and that's about the extent of it. So yeah, it's an ARM processor running a form of Linux with an emulator running over the top, kind of a shell.
Did you ask the question about the sort of legality of the emulation here? Because I think when this was first revealed, there was a lot of talk about them using Final Burn X, I guess it was, or which one was it? It was FB Alpha.
FB Alpha. So
yeah. So what's going on here?
It's a weird one, because when it was announced in April, we had a bit of a furore over the fact that it was using FB Alpha at all. The point of contention was that, well, this emulator uses the work of, you know, people in the community, and it's not really meant for resale. So since then, the mention of FB Alpha is removed from the website on the Capcom Home Arcade, and that seems to have been replaced with a mention of a guy called Barry Harris, who's worked through all these games at a base level, trying to get them all working. So when I emailed Koch Media for a statement on what was going on, they said, well, we've worked with Barry Harris and we're working with him to kind of custom tailor each one for it, and no mention of FB Alpha at all there. So we'll know more when it comes out, but for now it seems like they've kind of taken a separate path from that emulator.
Okay, well, we'll just have to wait and see. I need to look him up and see what he's done, actually. I'm kind of curious now. But that's interesting to know. So, I mean, that was kind of like the one sticking point, I think, on that side of things. So, but yeah, overall, I mean, it sounds like a pretty interesting product so far. I mean, the design is certainly a little strange, but seems like it's using some decent parts in there. The video output options at a glance seem pretty solid, if a little bare bones. What was the user interface like, actually? That's one thing I haven't seen.
So the user interface is pretty bare bones. On the surface, they've got some nice high quality PNGs supplied by Capcom, which you kind of scroll by sort of left, right. There's not much to it. Now, in terms of the settings, you have you have sort of a video settings mode with the 2 aspect ratios. And for each one, you've got the sort of filter, the blur filter. I would never vouch for using this filter, to be honest. It's right away, it just sort of kills the charm of it. What we really need is a CRT filter, which thankfully, there is some hope to get that eventually. There is a Wi-Fi module on the Capcom Home Arcade, which means there is some expansion potential.
Oh, wait, really? There's a Wi-Fi module on there?
Yes, that's right.
What is it designed to connect to?
So you can download updates, firmware updates, and also there's a leaderboard function in there as well per game. So there's global leaderboards.
This is interesting, actually, because we've had a lot of these mini consoles, if you will, over the past couple of years, but they've all been standalone, non-updatable boxes. So this is actually news to me that there is some sort of internet functionality built into it, and that's fascinating. So they're doing actual leaderboards on here. And there's potential for firmware updates, or I wonder if they could even add additional games down the line. This kind of opens up weird possibilities in my mind about what this product is now.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest, when you say there are 16 pre-installed games, I think that's a decent enough sample size to get started with.
Oh, for sure.
Obviously, the hope is that there'll be more. There'll be, from, just looking at it myself, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we just had the, Street Fighter Alpha series on there, or the X-Men games, or, even CPS3 stuff.
Marvel licensing.
Yeah, indeed. But I mean, they managed to get the Alien vs Predator license in there, so they are willing to bargain, I guess.
That's true. That's cool. Yeah, I'd like to see that. Yeah, CPS3 would be especially awesome, but because that's a whole different platform, I kind of wonder if that's even feasible. It's kind of interesting. I always thought like Capcom was very prevalent during his eras, and they kind of made a comeback actually recently. I kind of feel like if you wanted to go one step further, there'd be like a portal. If there was a mini Dreamcast ever made, I feel like it would also be a collection of Capcom games. So this is like step one, if you will. Obviously, I need to get hands on it as well, but from your limited hands on, actually, it sounds pretty fun actually, and it's an interesting idea. And obviously, like I said, there's been these unlicensed products that do the same thing. So if this is a licensed thing from, well, I guess not from Capcom specifically, you're saying it's from Koch Media, but either way, that's fascinating. Is there any other details about it that you have to share?
So yeah, I guess the last few details are about the emulation quality. So I started with a lot of the side-scrolling beat-em-ups, and they worked fine. Like really, just like gorgeous, smooth, low latency. I haven't put any tests to it, any measurements, but perceptually, and even, playing on a 4K TV where there'll be interpolation from that 1080p feed, and it's only 1080p output, by the way, there's no 720p or 4K from this machine. So yes, there are two issues on the frame rate side. One is expected. It's like the emulation of the game logic as it ran in the arcades, because they've clocked the emulator to the same speeds as the original hardware. And it kind of ties into the game design, because when there were a lot of sprites on screen, in these bullet hell shooters, you would then have a slow down moment where you could actually be like an aid to getting through all the bullets. So that works, and that's intentional. So yeah, a lot of the games ran pretty well to start, and then once I got to kind of the tail end of these titles, especially the side scrollers, I think Gigawing was among them. There were a couple of games which they had a sort of blips in the video feed where it would suddenly cut forward a few frames, and you'd lose kind of your place, you say, if you're playing a shooter or something like that. So there are some emulation issues to iron out.
Okay, I'll need to see this for myself, or maybe you can send over some footage of that, because that is bizarre, and
yes,
that's actually a little bit troubling for me. If like extra frames are being dropped and the behavior's being weird and skipping ahead.
Yeah, it's not ideal right now, but I think when we have an early hands-on with these units, we have to give it a bit of a benefit of the doubt. So we'll see. It's kind of like early days, couple of months yet to tweak it and refine the emulation on all the titles. But as I say, like the early games, like this happened in mostly very basic, non-taxing titles, whereas Aliens vs Predator and Cyberbots ran without any fault. So I was a bit confused, but it also gives me a bit of hope that actually if they can bring all of them up to par.
With that last segment then, that kind of rains in the parade for me a little bit, but obviously that's something we're gonna have to wait and see what the final product is like. The controls sound pretty good, the game selection sounds good, scaling options seem fine, mostly. But emulation issues, slowdown, and sound delay, I really hope they can fix that up, because that would be kind of a deal killer, especially for the price. But yeah, I mean, I think overall it's interesting. So
yeah, the hardware looks really good. The emulation needs work, but overall I like the promise of it, like just the idea of something that pays tribute to these CPS1 and 2 games in the home. If they nail it, would be amazing. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it turns out. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that probably does it for now. We've had a few technical hiccups today, but through the magic of editing, you should hopefully not notice a thing. But
we'll see.
I mean, we'll have, I guess, from here, like I said, Gamescom's next week. There's a lot of stuff coming up. I have some pretty cool videos in the works that I'm excited about. But yeah, so I guess that's going to wrap it up for now. So thanks for joining me, Tom.
Absolutely no worries, John. Till next time.
Absolutely. And if you guys enjoy this, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, ring the notification bell there at the top, and of course, follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.